December 2nd, 1967. The skies over Hanoi. American F-4 Phantoms, the most lethal fighters on the planet. $2.5 million per airframe. State-of-the-art radar. 6 air-to-air missiles strapped to every wing. Facing them, obsolete Soviet MiG-21S. 1/8 the cost. Primitive radar. 2 missiles. Pilots with a sliver of the flight hours their enemies logged. On paper, this isn't a contest. It's an execution. But the Americans are the ones dying. Vietnamese pilots are dropping Phantoms out of the sky with tactics the Pentagon cannot decode. Strike from below, ambush from the clouds, vanish before the enemy's instruments even register what happened. And threading through the center of all of it, one man, Nguyen Van Koc, a rice farmer's son, 23 years old. By the close of 1967, he will have destroyed 9 American aircraft. That record makes him the most successful fighter ace of the entire Vietnam War. How does a pilot strapped into an outdated machine bring the most powerful air force in human history to its knees? What tactics did the Vietnamese unlock that American commanders simply could not answer? And how did the blood lessons of these dogfights reshape aerial combat for every generation that followed? Nguyen Van Koc came into the world in 1944 in Nam Dinh province, 90 kilometers southeast of Hanoi. His father worked rice paddies, his mother kept chickens. No one in the family had ever stood close enough to touch an airplane. Then in 1963, North Vietnam opened recruitment for its air force. He was 19. He signed up, not out of patriotism, he wanted to fly. 500 young men applied. 30 were selected. He was one of them. By 1964, he was on his way to the Soviet Union, a classified training facility near Chkalovsky. This is where North Vietnamese pilots were forced into MiG-21 operators. The program was merciless. The MiG-21 was fast, razor agile, and utterly unforgiving. Top speed 2,100 km per hour. Combat radius 480 kilometers. Once a dogfight started, you had 15 minutes of fuel. After that, you either turned for base or you fell out of the sky. Soviet instructors drilled one doctrine into their skulls. You will not survive a prolonged engagement against American aircraft. They carry superior radar, superior missiles, more fuel. So you hit first, and you disappear faster than they can react. By late 1965, he touched down in North Vietnam again. His total flight time, 120 hours. American pilots rotating into the same theater carried over 500. That gap didn't concern him. He had a tactic, and he was about to test it against the most dominant air force the world had ever assembled. The F-4 Phantom II was a beast of engineering. McDonnell Douglas designed it in the late 1950s with a singular purpose: shred Soviet bombers before they reached American soil. It broke twice the speed of sound. It punched through 18,000 meters of altitude in under 2 minutes. Each airframe carried a price tag of $2.5 million, roughly $23 million in today's currency. Its AN/APQ-72 radar system could track targets at 45 kilometers. It bristled with 6 AIM-7 Sparrow missiles, engineered to lock onto enemy aircraft from beyond visual range, to kill a pilot before he even knew death was inbound. This $23 million weapon platform was, on every technical specification, physically impossible to defeat. Except for one catastrophic flaw: no gun. The engineers who built it believed dogfighting was extinct. Air combat's future existed at long range. Missiles handled everything. Close quarters fighting belonged to a dead era. They were dead wrong. When the F-4 Phantom deployed to Vietnam in 1965, American commanders radiated confidence. North Vietnam's entire air force amounted to maybe 40 planes, mostly aging MiG-17S, with a small cluster of newer MiG-21S. The United States fielded hundreds of Phantoms, crewed by the finest trained aviators on Earth. Total air superiority was expected within months. But Vietnam's war didn't unfold at 45 kilometers of clean radar separation. It erupted inside cloud banks, at treetop altitude, in knife-range ambushes where radar screens went blind and missile seekers couldn't find a lock. In that kind of fight, the F-4 Phantom wasn't untouchable. It was exposed. The Americans labeled it hit and run. The Vietnamese had a different name: guerrilla air warfare. The mechanics were precise. American bombing sorties into North Vietnam followed patterns that repeated like clockwork. Formations of F-105 Thunder Chiefs, heavy bomb-laden strike aircraft, would push north from Thai air bases. F-4 Phantoms would fly escort, holding position above and behind the strike package. The Americans held one critical edge: airborne radar. That radar could pick up enemy aircraft at 45 kilometers. Plenty of distance to maneuver, set up and engage. But radar carried a flaw. Low-flying targets, hugging the earth, vanished into ground clutter, and clouds blocked the signal entirely. The North Vietnamese intended to exploit both weaknesses. Ground control made it possible. Across the country, the North Vietnamese had constructed a web of early warning radar stations, built with Soviet guidance. These stations tracked American formations the instant they crossed into North Vietnamese airspace. Every reading fed into a central command post in Hanoi, codenamed Bison. Bison controlled everything: when to scramble the MiGs, what altitude to hold, what angle of approach to take. The MiG pilots didn't decide, they obeyed. Here was the design. MiG-21s would launch and immediately drop to low altitude, 500 meters above the ground, sometimes lower. Radars dark, engines quiet against the earth. The MiG-21 was compact. On American screens, skimming the terrain, it registered as nothing more than ground noise. Bison would vector the MiGs into attack position using ground-based radar. The fighters would tuck behind cloud banks or ridgelines, waiting. The Americans would pass overhead, their scopes clean, their confidence absolute. Then Bison's command: climb and attack. The MiGs would haul back on their sticks, afterburners shrieking. They'd punch through the clouds directly underneath the American formation. Inside that radar blind spot, the world's most sophisticated fighter jet was naked. The F-4's dead zone. At knife fight range, the American AIM-7 Sparrow missiles were worthless. They required time to achieve lock. In a surprise engagement, time didn't exist. The MiG-21's K-13 Atoll missile had an effective range of just 3 kilometers, but needed only 2 seconds to lock on. Fire. Plunge back into the clouds. Vanish before the Americans could process what happened. Total time in the fight, 60 to 90 seconds. On paper, the concept was flawless. But could it survive contact with reality? Could a farmer's son, carrying 120 hours of flight time, execute this against the most elite pilots on the planet? November 28, 1966, 2:14 p.m. Gia Lam Airfield, Hanoi. Nguyen Van Kok has been a combat pilot for 18 months. 47 sorties behind him. He squeezed the trigger in combat exactly 3 times. Never hit a thing. Today, he will watch this tactic prove itself for the first time. The alarm cuts through the airfield. American strike package inbound. 12 F-105 Thunder Chiefs with 4 F-4 Phantoms riding escort. Course north, aimed straight at the Paul Domer Bridge. A vital supply artery the Americans have been hammering for weeks. He sprints to his MiG-21, but today he's not the lead shooter. His flight leader is Nguyen Duy Kyo, a senior pilot with 3 years of combat under his belt. Nguyen Van Kok flies wingman. His task: hold formation on Kyo's wing, scan for threats, absorb everything. Pre-flight checks burn through fast. Fuel topped off. 2 K-13 Atolls on the rails. Cannon, 60 rounds. Radio alive. He buckles the harness tight. Engine ignition. The Tumansky R-11 turbojet screams awake. Ground control. Bison crackles through his headset. 4 aircraft. Immediate departure. Heading 180. Altitude 500 meters. Radar off. He doesn't hesitate. He never does. The ground controllers see the full battlefield. He sees only what his canopy frames. They launch. Q out front. He slots in 2 seconds behind. They hug the earth, racing over rice paddies and villages. American radar is sweeping for contacts at medium and high altitude. Down here, they don't exist. Bison's voice returns. American formation bearing 045. Range 40 kilometers. Altitude 6,000 meters. Hold current heading. He glances at his fuel gauge. 12 minutes. Maybe. Then he has to break off. The MiG-21 was never built for endurance missions. Declassified Soviet technical manuals put the aircraft's internal fuel capacity at roughly 45 minutes under standard conditions. In combat, with afterburner punching, that collapsed to 15 minutes or less. American pilots understood this. If they could keep a MiG locked in a dogfight longer than 10 minutes, it would burn through its fuel and have to break off or fall from the sky. But the Vietnamese had no intention of staying engaged that long. Target 20 kilometers. Begin climb. Afterburner. Q shoves the throttle forward first. He follows. The afterburner ignites. The MiG-21 rockets upward at more than 200 meters per second. G-forces crush them into their ejection seats. Peripheral vision shrinks to a tunnel. Every breath becomes a fight. 5 seconds later, they punch through the cloud layer at 5,500 meters. And there they are, 4 F-4 Phantoms. 800 meters ahead, slightly higher. Loose formation, scanning for threats. But their eyes are forward and above, not below. Q's targeting system locks the nearest Phantom. A solid, unwavering tone fills his headset. The American pilot still has no idea they're there. A 1984 US Air Force study on Vietnam air combat confirmed that American pilots reported zero radar warning before the attack in 68% of MiG ambush encounters. The MiGs flew too close, too low, too fast for the F-4's radar to pick them up in time. Q doesn't wait. He squeezes the trigger. The K-13 Atoll missile drops off the rail, its motor ignites, and it streaks toward the F-4's exhaust trail. A white ribbon of smoke leading straight to the target. The American pilot spots it, far too late. He yanks into a left brake turn, but the missile is already closing. The F-4 detonates. He watches it unfold, the fireball blooming outward, twisted debris tumbling through open sky. The remaining 3 Phantoms scatter wildly, heads on a swivel, hunting for the threat. But Q is already gone. Throttle chopped, rolling inverted, diving back into the clouds like he was never there. He stays glued to Q's wing, following him down. The 3 surviving Phantoms wheel toward where the MiGs had been. By the time they achieve radar lock, nothing. Empty air. Total time above the clouds, 12 seconds. They level off at 500 meters, heading south. Fuel gauge flashing red. 4 minutes of flight time remaining. Jialam airfield sits 35 kilometers away. They touch down with 90 seconds of fuel left in the tanks. The ground crew is already standing on the tarmac when they arrive. They've monitored the radio chatter. 1 kill confirmed. An F-4 Phantom destroyed. Q slides out of his cockpit. Calm, measured, professional. He's been through this before. He climbs down from his own aircraft. His hands tremble against the ladder. His flight suit is drenched. Not from fear, from raw adrenaline. From the shock of understanding that the tactic actually works. He hadn't fired a single round. He was the wingman, watching, absorbing, cataloging every detail. But he knew. His turn was coming. That night, Radio Hanoi broadcasts the shootdown. No names mentioned. But inside the Pentagon, analysts are scrambling to understand what just happened. Declassified US military records show that between September and December 1966, American forces lost 43 aircraft over North Vietnam. 8 of those were confirmed MiG kills. The loss rate was climbing and accelerating. North Vietnamese MiG tactics were producing results. Nguyen Van Cock had just witnessed exactly how effective those tactics could be. But the Americans weren't going to absorb these losses quietly. After watching MiG-21S successfully ambush their formations for November and December 1966, US military analysts began dissecting the pattern. The MiG struck when F-4 Phantoms were tied to bomber escort duty, distracted, tethered to the slower F-105 Thunder Chiefs. But they refused to engage pure F-4 fighter sweeps that carried no other burden. Colonel Robin Olds recognized the gap. Olds was a World War II ace, 13 confirmed kills against Luftwaffe fighters. 44 years old, aggressive, impatient. He'd been flying fighter sweeps over North Vietnam for months. And the MiGs wouldn't come near him. So he decided to force the issue. Operation Bolo. The concept was elegant in its deception. F-4 Phantoms would masquerade as F-105 bombers. Identical flight paths, identical altitudes, identical radio frequencies, identical electronic signatures. North Vietnamese ground controllers would read their screens and see a routine bombing raid, fat, vulnerable, begging to be intercepted. But when the MiGs climbed to attack, they'd find the sharpest fighter pilots in the US Air Force already positioned and waiting. January 2nd, 1967, 2:45 p.m. Olds leads 28 F-4 Phantoms toward Hanoi. They hold 4,500 meters, standard cruising altitude for F-105 strike packages. They transmit F-105 call signs. They fly the exact corridors bombers always use. Down below, North Vietnamese radar operators watch the formation crawl across their screens. Everything matches a standard American bombing run. The response is automatic. Scramble the MiGs. 16 MiG-21S launch from Phu Quien and Gia Lam. Some of North Vietnam's sharpest pilots are among them. They climb toward intercept altitude, expecting sluggish bombers weighed down with ordnance and fighter escorts too busy guarding their charges to fight. What they find instead is Robin Olds and 28 F-4s loaded with nothing but air-to-air missiles and a single objective: kill MiGs. The Vietnamese recognize the trap within seconds, but seconds are all it takes. Olds already owns altitude, speed, and position. The MiGs try their standard doctrine: climb, fire, dive away. No use. Every escape route is blocked. Phantoms fill the sky in every direction. The entire engagement lasts 12 minutes. Olds fires first. His AIM-7 Sparrow missile tracks a MiG-21 and tears it apart at medium range. His wingman drops another. Then another. Vietnamese pilots scatter toward the clouds, desperate for cover. But Americans are waiting there too. 7 MiG-21S destroyed. American losses, 0. Declassified US Air Force after-action reports confirmed that Operation Bolo eliminated nearly half of North Vietnam's operational MiG-21 fleet in one engagement. It stands as the most successful air-to-air operation of the entire Vietnam War. A devastating strike against the North Vietnamese Air Force, but not a killing blow. Because Nguyen Van Cock wasn't in the air. He was scheduled to fly that day. His MiG-21 sat fueled, armed, and ready on the tarmac at Gia Lam. Minutes before takeoff, ground control pulled him, reassigned to a different patrol sector. Some historians call it luck. Others believe Vietnamese controllers sensed something wrong. The American formation was too clean, too perfectly choreographed. Whatever kept him on the ground, it kept him alive. Operation Bolo forced the North Vietnamese to rethink everything. They grew cautious. No more large formations chasing obvious targets. They waited for the perfect moment when American defenses stretched thin or attention drifted elsewhere. The tactics stayed the same. The discipline behind it sharpened. the 921st Fighter Regiment disappeared from the skies for 3 months, retraining, recovering. At the Pentagon, officials declared Operation Bolo a decisive victory. The MiG threat neutralized. But had it ended? Or had the Vietnamese simply learned patience? And when they returned to the sky, what then? On April 30th, 1967, the Americans got their answer. April 30th, 1967, 2:14 p.m. Gia Lam Airfield, Hanoi. 3 months of silence. Broken. The 921st Fighter Regiment is operational again. The alarm screams through the base. American strike package inbound. Nguyen Van Kock sprints to his MiG-21. This time, he isn't riding as wingman. He's number 2 in a 4-ship formation. His own target, his own trigger. They launch. Low altitude, clouds wrapping around them like camouflage. Ground control vectors them into position. Target, 20 kilometers. Begin climb. Afterburner. He hauls back on the stick, punches through the cloud layer at 5,500 meters. 4 F-4 Phantoms dead ahead. He locks the second aircraft. Fires. The F-4 comes apart in midair. He rolls, dives back into the clouds. Total time exposed, 12 seconds. On the ground, the crew is already waiting when he taxis in. 2 kills confirmed. Nguyen Duy Kieu scored the other. But this time, Siêu Se pulled the trigger himself. That evening, Radio Hanoi broadcasts his name across the country. The farmer's son from Nam Dinh province. His first kill. Between April and December 1967, Nguyen Van Kock flew 23 additional combat missions. October 3rd, kill number 2, an F-4D. October 7th, kill number 3, an F-105. November 18th, kills 4 and 5, 2 F-105s downed in a single sortie, ace status. His face appeared on propaganda posters plastered across Hanoi. Radio broadcasts named him Defender of the Sky. School children memorized his story. But the Americans were memorizing it too. Declassified CIA reports revealed that US intelligence analysts had begun tracking individual North Vietnamese pilots by name. COC's call sign, Red 3107, surfaced again and again in after-action reports. He was now a priority target. American pilots received specific briefings. If you spot a MiG-21 punching straight up through cloud cover, guns blazing at knife fight distance, then vanishing before he can react, that's him. Kill him before he kills you. But catching him was the problem. He never stayed in a fight longer than 60 seconds, never repeated a pattern, never engaged unless the math favored him. December 1967, kills 6 and 7. December 28, 1967, kills 8 and 9. Double ace. 9 confirmed victories. The most lethal fighter pilot of the entire Vietnam War. He was 25 years old. Nguyen Van Kock never flew another combat mission after 1969. North Vietnamese command pulled him off the front lines. His new assignment: join the pilots who would come after him. He survived the war. Retired in 2002 as Chief Inspector of the Vietnamese Air Force. But what he left behind reached far beyond Vietnam's borders. Operation Bolo and the MiG ambush tactics it exposed forced a reckoning inside the American military. That reckoning produced the US Navy Fighter Weapons School in 1969. You know it by its other name, Top Gun. Turns out the dogfight wasn't dead after all. A farmer's son flying an outdated aircraft had proved that to the most powerful air force on Earth. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe and leave a like.